Yo, what's up guys? Alpha, and today I'm going to be doing a full in-depth deck breakdown of a deck that I've recently used to get top 5 with on the arena ladder, and that is my mono blue artifacts deck in Historic. Now I've been playing a bunch of different artifact brews ever since Kamigawa Neon Dynasty came out because I feel like it got some really nice additions to the format, and I feel like I've finally got to a point I'm really happy with this particular deck. You know, this particular build I recently went 8-0 with on the ladder into top 5, as you can see from the untapped screenshot, so it's been performing really well for me. So before I get into it, there's going to be an MTG zone link down in the description that will have the full deck list there if you want to import it into Arena and try the deck out for yourself. I'm also currently writing a full text article that will be going up on MTG zone soon that will have a sideboard guide, how I changed the deck for best of one, and some extra details. So check back in the description hopefully later this week, and I'll leave the link to that there as well. So with that out the way, this is my mono blue artifacts deck in Historic, and this deck is largely split into two categories. We've got a bunch of cheap artifacts in the deck, and then we've got a bunch of payoffs for running all those artifacts. So we're going to have a look at the payoffs first, starting off with 4 copies of Thought Monitor. So this is a 7 mana 2/2 with flying. When it enters the battlefield we draw 2 cards, but it has affinity for artifacts. So the idea with this card is we get a bunch of cheap artifacts down in the early game, and then we cast Thought Monitor for cheap. Ideally we want to be casting this for between 1 and 3 mana, we're pretty happy with. Casting this for 4 mana is also reasonable if we don't have any other better plays. But the really nice thing about this card is that it kind of mitigates the problem with decks that run a bunch of cheap artifacts, and that is that they tend to run out of gas pretty quickly. You know, if your deck is full of 0 and 1 mana artifacts, it's very easy to just, you know, vomit your hand out onto the battlefield really quickly in the first few turns, and then you kind of run out of gas. And so all of the payoff cards that were, or almost all of the payoff cards that we're running in the deck, kind of mitigate that to a certain extent. So Thought Monitor, you know, we get a bunch of cheap artifacts down, reduce the cost of the monitor down to ideally 3 or 4 mana, 2 or 1 mana we're really happy with, and then we can cast this. We get to draw an extra 2 cards, and we get a 2/2 body with flying as well, which is really relevant because the main way that we close the game out with this deck is with Nettle Cyst, which is the next card I'm going to talk about. So this is a 3 mana equipment, and when it enters the battlefield we get a token that we equip it with, and the equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact and or enchantment we control. Now obviously we don't run any enchantments in the deck, so this is all about the number of artifacts. And because of the amount of cheap artifacts we run in the deck, this can get really big really quickly. And one of the most common ways that we shut the game out is by equipping Nettle Cyst to one of our flyers. So either Thought Monitor, Ornithopter, or a token off Psymaster Thopterist. And then we make our flyer really big. And a lot of decks in the format don't have flying blockers, so we can just attack in for a huge amount in the air and kill the opponent really quickly. So Thought Monitor, the fact that it draws us 2 cards, but the body that we put into play also has flying, means that we can set up our endgame of Nettle Cyst on a flyer pretty consistently and pretty quickly. Then, like I said, Nettle Cyst is a really powerful card in the deck. It is our main finisher, and we do ideally want to be closing the game out with Nettle Cyst on a flying creature. But obviously there will be certain matchups where they have creatures that can block in the air, and there are also some situations where we won't have a flyer as well. So another way that we commonly close the game out with this deck is Nettle Cyst with Shadow Spear. So Shadow Spear, 1 mana equipment, and the equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has trample and lifelink. So the combination of making a creature really huge and then giving it both the keywords of trample and lifelink is so big. This is the perfect card for this deck because trample forces through damage. You know, the big weakness of Nettle Cyst is that it can't attack past champ blockers. If the opponent just has a bunch of small creatures that they can block with, then we're never really getting in with much damage through Nettle Cyst. So giving the creature trample as well is really important. But lifelink is so relevant in the format right now as well because there are so many decks that punish you for stabilizing at a low life total. You know, the sacrifice decks running Cat Oven and now Anvil as well can drain you out really quickly even if you stabilized. Deck like Is It Phoenix can get a bunch of damage out of nowhere with their Arc-like Phoenixes. Burn spells are still commonly played, and so there are a bunch of decks where we really want to be able to gain life, and you know, just setting up even an early Nettle Cyst that might not be lethal damage plus Shadow Spear against the aggressive creature decks or these decks that are trying to burn us out, just getting this lifelink every turn off the Shadow Spear is often good enough to just win the game on its own. So Nettle Cyst really important as our main finisher, either with our flyers or with Shadow Spear to force through the damage. The next payoff, and one of the first 3 legendary creatures we're running in the deck, is Emery, Lurker of the Loch. So this is a 3 mana 1/2. When it enters the battlefield we mill 4 cards, and we can tap it, choose an artifact in our graveyard and we can cast it this turn. So even though Emery's 3 mana, like Thought Monitor, it basically has affinity for artifacts, so it costs 1 less for each artifact we control. So we're almost always going to be casting this for 1 mana. Even outside of that, it is fine to cast this for 2 mana on turn 2. You know, say for example we just play a 1 mana artifact like a Moonsnare Prototype or a Spell Bomb on turn 1. We can just play Emery for 2 mana on turn 2, which is a decent enough deal. And typically we want to play Emery as soon as possible because the big weakness of this card is it has to survive a turn cycle in order to activate its effect. You know, it doesn't have haste, so we have to wait a turn for it to be playing cards from the graveyard. So that is the main weakness of the card, but if we can start bringing stuff back with Emery, it is so powerful. And the other great thing about this deck in particular is because we're running such a high density of 0 mana artifacts, it's not uncommon for us to be able to cast Emery on turn 1 as well. You know, if we have an opening hand with 2 0 mana artifacts and Emery, we can just play the 2 0 mana artifacts, and Emery costs 1, we can just play Emery on turn 1 and then immediately start getting artifacts back from the graveyard on turn 2. So basically every artifact in this deck is great to get back with Emery. The 0 mana artifacts synergize incredibly well with Emery, first of all because they reduce the cost very quickly, but also because we can bring them back from the graveyard without having to use any of the mana. So if we have stuff to do in our hand that we want to spend all of our mana on, we can just use Emery to get back a Moxamba to produce extra mana, an Ornithopter as an extra blocker, or as a creature to equip Nettlecyst with later in the game. Or against decks that utilise the graveyard a lot, we can repeatedly get back Tormod's Crypt, which is really strong against a deck like the Greasefang Parhelion deck, or something like Is It Phoenix as well. Moonsnare Prototype is also really good to get back, just as an extra way to produce mana. But the really powerful cards we're looking to get back with Emery are Nettlecyst and Shadow Spear. Obviously, like I said, these are our finishes, so if we mill them over with Emery or the opponent kills them, getting them back is really nice, especially Nettlecyst because we get the token every time we bring it back as well. Reality Chip is great. I'm going to talk about this card in a little bit, but this is a really nice card to get back as well to set up our late game. But the most powerful cards to get back with Emery are Nettlecyst, Aether Spellbomb, and Thought Monitor. So Nettlecyst I've talked about a bit already. Thought Monitor is obviously going to be great to get back off Emery if we can afford to cast it, because it just draws us 2 cards when it enters the battlefield. And on top of that, it kind of incentivizes the opponent not to attack us, because if they attack, we can just block with the Thought Monitor, it goes to the graveyard, and then we can just bring it back with Emery again the following turn. So we're essentially just drawing 2 cards every turn, which is insane. And then Aether Spellbomb is really sick with Emery. The only reason that we're really running Aether Spellbomb in the deck is because we're running Emery. So at a base rate we can sacrifice this to draw a card every turn and get it back with Emery. So for the cost of 2 mana, potentially over the cost of potentially over the course of 2 turns, we can just keep looping Spellbomb to essentially draw 2 cards every turn. But the really powerful thing with Spellbomb and Emery is that we can bounce a creature the opponent has back to their hand every turn, which is really strong against creature decks that don't have haste. In particular, a deck like Auras or Mono Green, for example. It's just so hard for them to ever get any pressure on the board, because we can just bounce their creature, get it back with Emery, and just do that every single turn. And the fact that Spellbomb can be activated at instant speed means that we can just hold it up during the opponent's turn as well. So this is really nice because it helps to shore up that matchup against the creature decks. But in particular in this deck it's really nice because typically the big weakness of running mono blue decks is that your interaction with creatures is really bad. You know, you have access to counter spells and card draw and other great effects, but typically mono blue struggles the most against creatures, and Emery plus Spellbomb gives us a really effective way of essentially shutting down the pressure that these creature decks can apply. Obviously if the opponent has haste creatures it becomes a little less effective, but outside of that, Emery plus Spellbomb is really strong and really helps to shore up those creature matchups. Next up we've got Signmaster Thopterist, and this could potentially be the most powerful card in the whole deck. It's so strong. So it's a 3 mana 1/4, which is decent stats for a start because it dodges almost all of the red based removal in the format. You know, the red base removal that deals damage like Lightning Helix, Anger of the Gods, Unholy Heat if they don't have Delirium, can't kill this. It's a very effective blocker in the early game as well. But the really powerful thing about this card is that whenever we cast an artifact spell, we create a 1/1 token with flying. And first of all, this is really great against the creature decks if they don't have trample. We can just very quickly build up an army of 1/1 tokens that can either champ block or apply pressure against the slower decks as well. But the really strong thing about this is that the tokens that it creates are also artifacts themselves. So for every artifact we cast, we're essentially getting another artifact off Sai, which combos insanely well, first of all, with Thought Monitor. If we have Sai down and we're playing artifacts, the cost of Thought Monitor gets reduced to 1 so quickly. But it's also insane with Nettle Cyst, because we're basically doubling up all the artifacts we have in play. So the amount of extra power and toughness we get off Nettle Cyst will go up so fast with Sai in play. Additionally, it also combos insanely well with Reality Chip. So I'll get to this in a second, but Reality Chip, once it's reconfigured to another creature, allows us to play off the top of our library. And because of the amount of cheap artifacts we have in the deck, if we have Sai plus Reality Chip, we're getting to play a bunch of cheap artifacts off the deck. So we're basically never going to run out of cards to play, and for each artifact we play, we get a token in addition to it, so that's basically impossible for any deck to beat unless they have a sweeper. In addition to that, Sai also has an activated ability where we can pay 2 mana and sacrifice 2 artifacts to draw a card, which is really nice. Again, you know, like I said, the main problem with the deck running a bunch of cheap artifacts is that you can tend to run out of steam pretty fast. So the fact that we have this option on Sai to start sacrificing our artifacts in order to draw cards is really powerful, and making sure we don't run out of steam as well. So Sai, really strong, particularly against the creature decks, but it's just a card that really, you know, ties the decks together and puts so many artifacts into play that it makes all of our future Thought Monitors and Nettle Cysts really strong. Then we've got 4 copies of Reality Chip, the last legendary creature in the deck. This is a really strong card, and it's been so effective in this deck. So at a base rate, it's a 2 mana 0/4, which is a decent enough blocker against the creature decks in the early game. We can look at the top card of our library at any time, and we can reconfigure it for 3 mana, which basically means it turns into an artifact that we can equip to one of our creatures. And when it's attached to a creature, we can play lands and cast spells from the top of our library. And that ability in this deck is so strong, because we are essentially, you know, an explosive early game deck, but once we get Reality Chip online, we become the strongest late game deck as well. If the opponent isn't able to deal with Reality Chip, we have the inevitability there. We are just going to be able to cast through our whole library. And we're only running 20 lands in the deck, and we can also play lands off the top with Reality Chip, as well as having a bunch of effects that enable us to draw cards. So it's so common that we can get, you know, 5 or 6 cards a turn off the Reality Chip once it's live. So this card is so strong in this deck, and it basically gives us this unbeatable late game if the opponent isn't playing combo or doesn't have a way to kill it. So you might be thinking, why I'm running 4 of all of these legendary creatures? You know, in general, you don't really want to be maxing out on 4 of a legendary creature, because obviously if you have multiples of them, you can't have them both on the battlefield at the same time. But the first reason is that these are cards that we always want to see. You know, in this deck, you never want to be keeping a hand without a payoff. You know, you don't want to be keeping a hand of just cheap artifacts and no payoff, so you want to have at least one of these in your opening hand as often as possible. The other thing is that these cards just run away with the game. Emery, Sai and Reality Chip, if the opponent doesn't kill them, we're almost always going to be winning that game anyway, because they have such a big impact on the game. We get so much value off all 3 of them. So even if we do have the second one, if the opponent doesn't kill it, we're usually winning anyway. And if they do kill it, then we have that second one as a backup. But the main reason that I'm running 4 of these is because of Mox Amber. So I want to talk about Mox Amber briefly, but just generally about 0 mana artifacts in Historic. So, like I said, I've been playing a bunch of these affinity style artifact decks, and the thing I've noticed about them, and the thing that really appeals to me the most, is that they can have such insane explosive starts, but a lot of the time the consistency that you have these explosive starts depends on how many 0 mana artifacts you can run. And there really aren't that many good ones in Historic. So we do have Ornithopter, which I think is perfect for this sort of deck. It's a good creature that we can get down to block in the early game, but the fact it has flying is great. You know, it's a cheap creature that we can equip with Reality Chip if we have just these 2 to start off with. But the fact it's a flyer works really well with our finisher Nettle Cyst as well. You know, like I said, attaching Nettle Cyst to a flyer is the way that we commonly shut the game out. So Ornithopter is great. But after that, the quality of 0 mana artifacts that are playable in the format drop quite a lot. There's obviously Tormod's Crypt, but this is a card that, you know, its quality really depends on the deck we're up against. Obviously, it's insane against decks that usually use the graveyard, but if you're in a matchup where the opponent doesn't use the graveyard, it's essentially 0 mana do nothing, which just, even though we want a high density of 0 mana cards, is not worth it. And the other problem with decks, before I was running decks with Mox Amber, I was often running decks with 4 Tormod script. And the problem with that is there are obviously matchups that don't use the graveyard where you want to board out the Tormod script, and then you lose that explosivity because you're cutting 4 of your 0 mana artifacts. So the fact that we can run Mox Amber, which is probably the best, or actually definitely the best 0 mana artifact in the whole format, is huge. Another big thing about Mox Amber is that these sorts of decks really want to have cheap mana producers. Moonsnare Prototype in particular is such a big upgrade to these style of decks because mana is often a choke point for these sort of decks. We want cheap artifacts that produce mana to enable early Thought Monitors, but also we just generally want a lot of mana for stuff like Reality Chip, Emery and Sai anyway. So the fact that we have Mox Amber that produces mana, the fact we have 12 enablers that make it live a lot of the time, and the fact that we can just have these insane starts where we can maybe get Sai down on turn 2 and then Thought Monitor immediately off the Mox Amber just means that we can commit to the battlefield so fast. And having access to a high density of 0 mana artifacts without having to maximize up to 4 Tormod scripts is so huge as well. So Mox Amber, in addition to these 3 different legendary creatures, just enables these insane explosive starts whilst also enabling us to produce extra mana for all 3 of these cards when we need it. So let's have a look at the other cheaper artifacts in the deck. Like I said, Ornithopter is really important because it's a flyer that we can equip Nettlecyst to, we can block with it in the early game, and also we can equip Reality Chip to it as well. One of the weaknesses of Reality Chip, if you're running a bunch of cheap non-creature artifacts, is that you don't often have a creature to reconfigure it to. So the fact, even though Ornithopter can be killed by most removal, it does give us a body to equip Reality Chip to, which is great. Tormod script, like I've said, I think the difference between 0 and 1 mana artifacts in this deck is such a big deal. Particularly with Emery, we want 0 mana artifacts to enable turn 1 Emery, but also Emery being able to play 0 mana artifacts from the graveyard is great because it allows us to then spend all of our mana on stuff in our hand. 0 mana artifacts with Sai is great because we can wait until turn 3 to play our 0 mana artifacts and then immediately get 1/1s off it. It's also great with Reality Chip because when we're playing off the top of our library, we want to see 0 mana cards because we literally just get cards for free off the top of our library. They're great with Nettlecyst because we can make a really big creature really quickly. And they're also great with Thought Monitor because we want to reduce the cost as quickly as possible, and nothing does that better than 0 mana artifacts. So the difference between Tormod script and something like Soulguard Lantern or Relic of Progenitus is so huge at just speeding up the deck. But the great thing about this particular build, because we're running Mox Amber, we don't need to be running 4 Tormod script. And I did test Soulguard Lantern and Relic of Progenitus in this slot for a while. Obviously, the big advantage of Soulguard Lantern and Relic is that we can cycle it away to draw a card when we don't need to exile the graveyard. But in this deck, we want artifacts on the battlefield as much as possible for stuff like Thought Monitor and for stuff like Nettlecyst as well. So it always felt really bad. If I was in a situation where I had to cycle away the Soulguard Lantern or Relic of Progenitus, that's the last thing you want to be doing. So you're usually pretty behind in those situations anyway, and most of the time you want it on the battlefield. So I like having Tormod script in the spot of Soulguard Lantern or Relic of Progenitus, just because it speeds up the deck quite a lot. And the fact we're only having to run 2 in the main deck rather than 4 is really good, obviously against the matchups where they're not using the graveyard. But there are a decent number of decks that do use the graveyard, stuff like Phoenix, Greasefang Parhelion. This improves the matchup a lot, game 1. Then we've got 4 copies of Aether Spellbomb. Like I said, this is mainly here for combination with Emery, but it's just nice to have in the early game. Just buy us a bit of tempo against the creature decks by bouncing their creature, or just cycling it away to draw a card if we need, and then it will just be in the graveyard for Emery later in the game. Moonsnare Prototype is such a big upgrade for these artifact decks. Like I said, mana is often a choke point in these decks, so the fact that we can have a cheap artifact that also produces mana is really nice. It also enables us to play 3 artifacts on turn 1. If we go turn 1 Moonsnare Prototype and then a 0 mana artifact, we can then tap that 0 mana artifact to the prototype in order to play another 1 mana artifact, which is an insanely fast start and can often enable Thought Monitor really fast as well. And then the fact that we have the channel ability on this is really sick as well, if we have it in the late game, at being able to just deal with any permanent and since channel can't be countered, we can just use it to get rid of anything. So Moonsnare Prototype, great in the early game at producing mana, but then also gives us a temporary answer to anything later in the game as well, which is great. Shadow Spear I've already talked about. I feel like this card is really necessary at both forcing through damage with Nettle Cyst, and also buying us time against the aggressive decks as well. Then onto the mana base, only running 20 lands because, you know, we want to hit our second land as often as possible, but we don't want to have too many lands because we have so many cheap cards as well. Additionally, with Reality Chip, we don't want to risk bricking with multiple lands on the top, so 20 has felt like a good amount to me. I could see potentially going up to 21, but then I'm worried a little bit about flooding out. In terms of the actual lands themselves, I guess the most obvious question you might have is why I'm running all of these pathways instead of islands here, and the reason for that is exclusively because of Master of the Pearl Trident. So this is a card that's run in the Merfolk deck, and it gives all of their Merfolk Island Walk, which basically makes it impossible to block. So the reason that I'm running the pathways over islands is so that if we queue into Merfolk and they have Master of the Pearl Trident, they can't just attack through. You know, every matchup I had where I was running all islands, the only way we could really beat that is if we had Emery plus Spellbomb and we could bounce the Master of the Pearl Trident every turn, but it's basically free. You know, the only downside of running the pathways instead of islands is, first of all, if the opponent's playing something like Archon of Emeria, they might enter tapped, and it also gives the opponent targets for their Field of Ruin, but outside of that, I think it's worth it if you have access to the pathways. But because it is such a minor change, you know, it's only relevant against Merfolk, and it's only relevant if they have Master of the Pearl Trident. If you're missing wildcards, you can just run islands instead of these pathways. In terms of the other lands, Hall of Storm Giants, really nice as a man land, and this does come up more than you'd expect. In a deck like this with such a low mana curve and only 20 lands, you don't really expect this to come up too often. But I have won multiple games with this, you know, especially with Moonsnare Prototype producing extra mana. It's not too difficult for us to animate this when we need. And because we're running mono blue, we might as well run a couple of Hall of Storm Giants. And then we've got 4 Treasure Vault as well. So this is an artifact land, which is really nice because it reduces the cost of Emery and Thought Monitor, whilst also increasing the power and toughness that Nettle Cyst gives us as well. A couple of things to note about this: it does have an activated ability, which can be easy to forget about, but this can be relevant if we don't quite have lethal off Nettle Cyst. If we have a bunch of mana open and we're attacking with Nettle Cyst, if the damage is going through, we can then crack Treasure Vault to put a bunch of treasures into play, which increases the amount of power and toughness that Nettle Cyst gives. One other thing to note about this card is that the auto-tapper loves to keep this land untapped because of the activated ability. So if you're planning to use Treasure Vault for mana, it's often better to just manually tap it, because otherwise it will often auto-tap all your blue lands, and then you'll not have, which can often lead to situations where you don't have blue mana when you need it. So that's the main deck. I've found it really, really nice, really effective. Very streamlined. You know, a couple copies of Tormod's Crypt has been great as additional main deck graveyard hate, but it's not too much that the matchups where they don't use the graveyard isn't enough. And the rest of the deck has felt really strong. It has very explosive starts, and because of stuff like Reality Chip, Thought Monitor and Emery, we have a pretty good late game plan as well. So now onto the sideboard. Nothing too special going on here really. We've got 2 Tormod's Crypt and 2 Soul Guide Lantern as additional graveyard hate, which I feel is really important right now because of decks like Is It Phoenix and the Greasefang Parhelion decks. You know, we want to see graveyard hate as often as possible, and they're both decks that kind of require graveyard hate before turn 3 because of Phoenix is coming back and because of Greasefang as well. We've got a couple of copies of Pithing Needle, so this is mainly here for, first of all, for control. It's shutting off stuff like Teferi. If we can keep their Teferi offline, then it just stops them running away with the game. But it's also really good against the food decks. We can use this to name Witch's Oven to stop them using that. You can also name Cauldron Familiar if they have excess food, and then they can't ever bring Familiar back from the graveyard. And there are also some other fringe decks that have activated abilities as well, but this is mainly here for control and the Cat Oven decks as well. Then we've got the 3rd copy of Shadow Spear, just for those matchups where we need the life gain. You know, against any of the aggressive decks, having access to that 3rd copy of Shadow Spear, even though it's legendary, is just really nice at constantly gaining us life every turn to make sure that we don't fall too far behind. And then the rest of the sideboard is just counter spells. So we've got 4 copies of Disruption Protocol and 4 copies of Metallic Rebuke. And the reason I'm going really hard with counter spells in the side deck is mainly because of Divine Purge. So if you've been playing artifact decks recently, you'll know how brutal this card is for them. So I feel like running 8 counter spells on the sideboard is really necessary against the control decks, just to make sure that we have an answer to one as soon as possible, because getting hit by Divine Purge, even just once, is usually game over against this deck. So we want to have access to counter spells as often as possible. Obviously counterspells are just generally good against control anyway. The reason I'm running these particular ones, I think Metallic Rebuke is just kind of an auto-include for these artifact decks because it's such an efficient counterspell for what we get. But the reason I'm running Disruption Protocol over something like Spell Pierce or Miscast is because there are also other matchups where we do want counterspells as well. You know, against a deck like the Green-White Heliod combo deck, we don't really have that many good ways to interact with what they're doing, so having access to unconditional counterspells in those matchups really helps as well. So basically any other combo deck or control, we bring in the counterspells to help there as well. So that's the deck. I've been really impressed with it and it's been so much fun to play as well. So next up I've just got a few matches that I was playing with on the arena ladder so you guys can see the deck in action. If you've got any questions at all, drop me a comment below and I'll get back to you, and I hope you enjoy. Big up. Okay, sweet, here we go. Okay, so going second here. So one-landers are reasonable with this deck, but you typically want Moonsnare Prototype as well, so I don't think we want to keep that. This, on the other hand, looks pretty good. Just trying to think what we want to put back here. Probably Ornithopter, I'd imagine. You know, we still have two other creatures to attach Reality Chip to. We have a good turn 1 play. Tormod's Crypt is nice, it's just an extra artifact. So Steam Vents could be a number of things here. We'll lead on the Prototype. I think we'll hold on to Tormod's Crypt, ideally to play the turn we play Sai, or potentially to discount Emery a little further. Okay, Portable Hole. So it looks like Jeskai control, which I'm happy to see them blue-white because it means they're less likely to be running Divine Purge. So even though holding on to Tormod's Crypt is typically nice with Sai, I'm going to play it on turn 2 here just to get Emery down. You know, Emery is typically, if you can get it down, you want to get it down as soon as possible. Okay, sweet. Looks like Emery survives then, so they're unlikely to have Helix. So they could have Sensor or Jwari Disruption, but I don't think it's worth waiting to play Sai or Nettlecyst here. I think there's probably higher upside of playing Sai here, because we can play Sai and then use Emery to get back Ornithopter and immediately get a 1-1 off the Sai, which is pretty sick. And then the other great thing about this is that because of Sai's activated ability, we can kind of not commit any further to the battlefield. Like, obviously they could have a Wrath here, but if they don't, we obviously don't want to overcommit into a Wrath. So because we have Sai plus Emery going here, we can just keep... Oh wow, I'm surprised to see that during the main phase, but we can just keep using Emery to bring back Ornithopters to make 1-1s off the Sai, and then we can use Sai's ability to sacrifice the Ornithopters to keep them going back to the graveyard. So we're constantly building up our board and drawing every turn without having to commit anything extra, because I feel like if we play Nettlecyst or Reality Chip here, we just have nothing to recover from if they have a sweeper. So we'll pass here and we can just sack both the Ornithopters to the Sai at the end of the opponent's turn, or in response to a Wrath if they have it. They don't have double white here, which is obviously great, and they missed their second white again, so they could very well have a Wrath, but they just don't have the mana to cast it here. So we'll use Sai to sack the Ornithopters. I don't think it's worth sacking anything else here, because we do want to keep applying pressure with the 1-1s here, and I think since they're running Jeskai, they are pretty likely to be running Torrential Gearhulk and Mizzix's Mastery. So I want to hold up Tormod's Crypt for as long as I can here. And we don't really need to if we're getting Ornithopters back every turn anyway. So we make another 1-1 off the Sai, and I still don't think it's worth committing anything else to the battlefield here. You know, if I had to guess, they probably do have a Wrath, they just don't have a second white mana yet. Okay, so they scribe 1 to the top, 1 to the bottom. Okay, there's the second white. And wow, no Wrath, okay. That's good to see. So we could just pass here. We could sack the Ornithopter and the Tormod's Crypt, but like I said, now especially because they have Gearhulk banner up, I think we're just going to sack one of the 1-1s, which is a bit annoying because it does slow our clock down a little bit, but I think it's important to keep the cards flowing here, especially against control. And we do want to hit our 5th land. Yeah, perfect. Because now we can... Well, we'll get the Ornithopter back first, but we can now play Reality Chip and reconfigure it, so that next turn we can start playing off the top of our library. And if they do have a Wrath, we still get to keep the Reality Chip, because if the creature the Reality Chip is attached to dies, it just turns back into a creature again, so we'll have something on the board to recover with if they do have a sweeper. So I think we'll reconfigure to the creature that we don't care about getting killed. You know, if they have a Helix or something, we don't really care that much if Ornithopter dies. Okay, sweet, so we get away with that. I'm not going to attack with Psy here because if they have Shark Typhoon, it'll be a 4/4 and they can kill the Psy. And Psy has been really important so far, so... Okay, so they do have Gear Hulk, only got Archmage's Charm in the graveyard, so we'll just sack the Tormod's Crypt here to stop them getting value off it. And, I mean, even if they have a Wrath now, I guess Anger of the Gods is still pretty bad. We still get to keep Psy if that's the case, but... Okay, it looks like they still haven't found a sweeper, which is great for us. Okay, they play a tap land. And I'm surprised they're not holding up the Archmage's Charm. They could always draw 2 during the end step. I guess they want to play around Rebuke. But now, okay, I was going to say now we get to play off the top anyway, but yeah, I mean, them just missing Wraths for that whole game was great, and we barely committed anything extra to the battlefield. So, against Control, we've got quite a lot to bring in here, especially against Jeskai. I think two more Tormod's Crypt, we now know they're playing Gear Hulk. We'll bring in the Pithing Needle. We haven't seen Teferi, but we can assume they're playing it. We'll bring in the counter spells. Spellbomb is obviously not great here. So because of Spellbomb being cut, we could cut some Emeries as well, because I feel like the quality of Emery does drop off when we cut Spellbomb. But it was good that last game, so I'm not really sure. Psy feels a little bit slow as well, so maybe we cut... I'm not really sure actually. Psy is a little bit slow and is generally better against creature matchups, but it was really good there. And I'm thinking Emery does probably get quite, well, a fair bit worse against Control when they're going to have extra removal and we're cutting Spellbomb. Because we're cutting Emery, I'm also going to have to cut some Mox Ambers because we have less legendary creatures. Shadow Spear isn't as important either, so I think I'll trim that. And I think that looks fine. You know, Shadow Spear does still have good value because they'll have their Gear Hulk. They probably run Shark Typhoon as well. But I mean, I think it would also be reasonable to cut that second Shadow Spear for a second Pithing Needle, I think. You know, we haven't seen Teferi, but we can assume they're probably running it. I mean, but considering they're running Gear Hulk as well, they're probably running it in fewer numbers, so I don't know. Yeah, this hand looks good. We've got, you know, a decent mix of early game and payoffs here. So I'll lead on the Mean Snare prototype. Again, I'd ideally like to hold on to Ornithopter until we get to play Psy, so that we can immediately get a 1/1. So they will hold the prototype again. Okay, Rebuke, that's a nice draw, and I am going to play the Ornithopter now because now we have Rebuke live. We can use the Ornithopter to pay for Rebuke on turn 2 here, which is really nice. Okay, so they just pass. We'll play a land, and we could just hold Rebuke up again. You know, tapping out for Nettle Assist or Psy does make us not have access to a counter spell, but I think we can't just sit back against Control. We have to apply some sort of pressure, so it does kind of suck that we're going to have to be shields down with this Metallic Rebuke for a turn at least here, but I think it's worth it. See if they got a counter spell for Psy here. Looks like they got something. Oh, okay, that's pretty bad. So Prismari Command kills our land and our Ornithopter. That's a pretty efficient use of 3 mana, but not the end of the world. You know, we still have a Nettle Assist next turn as a potential play, so... Okay, so they tap out for Narset as well, which is great. Gives us a window. And now we see they've got Veto. I think we're almost definitely going to slam the Nettle Assist here, while they don't have enough mana for the Veto. You know, sneak it underneath. And then we'll attack the Narset here, so that if they want to activate again, they get rid of it. Because Narset is annoying, especially because we've got Thought Monitor. We'd have to kill it before playing the Thought Monitor, so we actually get to draw 2. Now this is the key turn. If we can survive a sweeper here, I feel pretty confident, because we can Reality Chip next turn and have Metallic Rebuke up. Okay, it's very interesting. So from our point of view, it would be pretty bad if they Helix at their end step. But because they have Veto as well as Helix, I think they're pretty heavily incentivized to just hold the mana up here, so they have access to both. But then that's better for us because it gives us a window to use Rebuke here. So we'll play Reality Chip, and they kind of have to Helix here if they want to. Oh well, they don't. So that means we can pretty cleanly kill Teferi here, which is great. The 1/1 I'm going to also attack Teferi with, just in case they have something like Brazen Borrower. I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference missing 1 damage, just to guarantee that Teferi takes maximum damage here. And we can pass with Metallic Rebuke still up here, which is great. Just in case they have a sweeper, you know. If they have land into Wrath of God, they can Dovin's Veto our Rebuke, which would suck, but... Okay, it doesn't look like they have a sweeper. I'd imagine they would play it this turn, potentially. Okay, so pass back to us. Treasure Vault's nice here because it means we can cast Thought Monitor for slightly less. And it makes Nettle Cyst out of range of Helix again as well. So Nettle Cyst goes up to a 6/6. Oh wow, Thought Monitor's a great draw because we can play the second monitor and still have Rebuke up here, which is great. And the Tormod Script as well, sweet. So we could play Pithing Needle, but keeping mana up for Rebuke here is so important. So we'll attack him with everything here. And next turn they could have Wrath and they could counter our Rebuke, but wow, the fact they're playing Helix makes me think they probably don't have a Wrath, which is, you know, that would be amazing. I think we'd probably just win the game next turn if that was the case. Oh wow, they don't have it, sweet. Okay, so going second here. Now typically I don't like keeping 1 landers, but with double Moonsnare Prototype and we're going second, I think this is probably a reasonable keep. You know, we have a decent chance of drawing our second land, and even if we don't, we kind of have excess mana off the Moonsnare Prototype anyway. Okay, Aether Spellbomb. Okay, perfect. So a second 0 mana artifact is great because we can play Emery on turn 1 here, which is huge. Now Spellbomb, I mean, the opponent's, you know, this is probably a mirror match. Oh, wow. So we wouldn't have drawn our second land for 3 turns, so we got pretty lucky with that Emery Mill then. Now I imagine the opponent will bounce Emery here, but that's kind of... They have to use their Spellbomb up just on that, so I'm completely fine with that. Now obviously a second land would be huge here, because then we can play Prototype and start getting more mana. Sentinel is kind of annoying as well, because we'll have to give them a draw if we do play Prototype. Okay, second land perfect, so play Emery first here again, I think, yeah. And then even though we have to give them a draw off the Sentinel, I think it's absolutely worth it for the Prototype, because playing the Prototype here, sure we do give them a card, but it will mean that we don't have to give them a card in future. We'll have access to more mana so that we can pay for future Sentinel taxes. So... see what we got in the graveyard. So we got a pretty stacked graveyard already. We got Reality Chip, Monitor, Nettle Cyst, and I think Shadow Spear. So we've got loads of the key cards there. Okay, so opponents on the Moonsnare Prototype. So it looks like opponents on Blue-White Affinity. So I imagine they'll be running Portable Hole as well. Okay, so they play Nettle Cyst, which I'm not too worried about. Extra land is perfect because we can play Thought Monitor here, and we don't have to pay the Sentinel tax. I think we'll tap down the Ornithopter here. You know, we're still not 100% sure what the opponent's on, so I want to keep up Tormod Script if possible. Could play Moxamba and Moonsnare Prototype, but we you know, like I said, we played the Prototype last turn so that we could play around future Sentinel taxes. So I think we'll wait a turn to play the Amber here, so that we can pay the Sentinel tax and not give them free cards, because we don't want to be giving them free cards if we can afford it. Okay, so they tap. Okay, they're playing Sai as well. But again, I'm not too fussed about Sai. You know, the only card I'm really worried about from their side right now is Shadow Spear, because you know we can get stuff back with Emery every turn. We also have the Reality Chip in the graveyard, which is going to be a decisive card in this matchup, I think. So I think we can afford to take 6 here. We'll keep Thought Monitor. Treasure Vault's a nice one as well, because it means we can pay less for the Thought Monitor we've got in hand. So I think we can afford to pay the tax for the Amber here. So I think we'll play the Amber, pay the Sentinel tax. I want to get Reality Chip in play, because that'll dig us closer to our own site and our own way to close out the game as well. So we want to get Reality Chip. You know, I would have blocked last turn with Thought Monitor if I didn't have anything better in Grave, because obviously getting back Thought Monitor over and over again is great. But getting Reality Chip online in this matchup feels huge. Don't mind tapping down the Tormod's Crypt now, because I feel more confident in what they're running. We can play the Thought Monitor for 1 mana. See what we hit. Oh wow, Psy on top, that's perfect. And we can play Spellbomb here as well. Spellbomb plus Emery is going to be really important here. It's stopping the opponent's Emerys if they're running that as well. And I don't think it's worth getting in for attack here. That feels pretty greedy. You know, we are still on the back foot in terms of tempo, so for now anyway. And this next turn, if we can survive this next turn, I feel we're in a great position, because then we can go Psy and Reality Chip. And Psy plus Reality Chip in this matchup is just going to be able to win the game on its own, I'm pretty confident. Unless they have Metallic Rebuke for Psy or something. Okay, so the opponent does have Thought Monitor. Again, the main thing I'm worried about here is Shadow Spear. If they don't have Shadow Spear, we're in a great spot though. And I think if we can survive this turn, we're good, because we have Spellbomb available to bounce whatever they equip Shadow Spear with. You know, they could potentially make it quite annoying if they equip their Automaton with the Shadow Spear, because we need to keep 3 mana up to bounce it and pay for the ward tax, but okay, Spellbomb's interesting. I feel like we should still block with the Thought Monitor, because it basically forces them to use their Spellbomb here. Because if they don't bounce the Emery, we can just keep getting Thought Monitor back every turn. Okay, so they do bounce the Emery, but that's fine. Means their Spellbomb is used up now. So we definitely want to get Psy down here, for sure. We also definitely want to get Emery back in play. And we'd love to reconfigure the Reality Chip as well, but the problem is we're 1 mana short of doing that and keeping Spellbomb up. I think out of everything, it's probably more important that we get Emery back in play, so we'll definitely do that first, and then we have 3 mana available. We can either hold up mana for Spellbomb, which allows us to play around Shadow Spear even if they equip it to the Automaton. You know, they could equip Nettle Cyst and Shadow Spear to the Automaton, which would win them the game, but I'm pretty sure they don't have Shadow Spear. They need to draw it this turn for that to be the better play, and I feel like it's a big waste of mana. You know, I think it's worth taking the risk, equipping this turn, and this just gives them 1 turn to draw Shadow Spear, and if they don't, I'm pretty sure we just run away with the game here, because we have Reality Chip and Emery live. So we'll give them 1 turn. If they drew Shadow Spear, then they potentially win, but if they don't, then we're almost definitely going to run away with the game here, I think. So this is the most important turn, I think. So next turn, if we do survive, obviously we can play off the top. We can get Nettle Cyst and Shadow Spear into play as quickly as possible. Let's see what we've got in the graveyard. So yeah, we've got Nettle Cyst, we've got Shadow Spear, we've got Thought Monitor. And we're going to be playing off the top with the Reality Chip and Psy, so the fact the opponent's in the tank is a really good sign. If they have Shadow Spear, I'm pretty sure they just play Shadow Spear and then equip everything to the Automaton. Or I guess they don't even need to equip to the Automaton, because we don't have any mana available. If we had 1 mana up for the Spellbomb, they'd have to equip to the Automaton to play around Spellbomb bouncing it, but you know, the fact they're in the tank here, I'm pretty sure they don't have it. Okay, they're attacking with everything. I guess they realised that because we have Psy and Reality Chip, we have the better late game here, so they have to just apply pressure. But we have pretty good blocks here. We can trade with one of them, we can block with the Ornithopter, and then we can just stem the bleeding by blocking here and here, and then we take, what, 5 damage down to 9. Interesting they keep the Sentinel back. I guess they want to play around us hitting Nettle Cyst. And I guess they can equip Nettle Cyst to the Sentinel. Okay, they've got their own Emery. And they do have Spellbomb in the graveyard, so that is something we need to be wary of. Okay, and they do equip the Nettle Cyst to the Sentinel. So I think we're pretty incentivized to bounce the Sentinel with the Spellbomb here, because we really don't want to be giving them free cards at this point in the game. So I think we'll lead on bouncing the Sentinel here. And then we're kind of wasting the mana they spent to equip it as well. And it basically, you know, even if they didn't have Nettle Cyst attack, attached, we'd still be happy to pay 1 for the Sentinel tax. And considering we can get considering we can get Spellbomb back with Emery, this is such a it's definitely worth doing, I think. Okay. Looks like they have something, but they only have colourless mana, so I'm not sure what they could have here. Okay, so Sentinel goes back, we get to play Amber off the top. So another Psy isn't ideal. Ideally I would like to get Spellbomb back with Emery here, but considering we've broked on top, I think I want to make the most of this turn to get ahead, so I'm going to play Monitor here, just to get this Psy off the top of the deck so we can hopefully hit something else better. Okay, Ornithopter perfect. Get another land in play. So we got Treasure Vault on top. I think we have so many artifacts in play that it's probably worth activating Psy here. Just to get the land off top and hopefully keep going off a little bit more. Now that was potentially a little bit greedy because we could have got Spellbomb back with Emery to bounce their Emery to just make sure they never get an Emery activation, but I think it's, you know, we're getting so much additional stuff in play here that it's worth it. Emery on top, that's alright. I think we can afford to play another Emery here. And then see what else we hit. Okay, another land. That's a little bit unfortunate. But I think we can just equip a Thought Monitor with the Shadow Spear here and just start gaining some life back. And then, even if they do get Spellbomb back and bounce our Emery, we're just playing off the top of the library. We've still got Nettle Cysts left in the deck, so I'm pretty confident. Even though we didn't get the Spellbomb back there, I'm still pretty confident from this spot. And we also have Tormod's Crypt to shut off their Emery as well, so sweet, we got there. So this matchup, normally against Affinity decks I would take out Tormod's Crypt, but the opponent's running Emery, so Tormod's Crypt is pretty reasonable here, you know. It basically meant that we didn't have to bring back the Spellbomb that last turn and we could go off a little bit more because we had the Tormod's Crypt, so you know, we could replace Tormod's Crypt with Pithing Needle, which is slightly better against Emery because it's more of a permanent answer, but the difference between 0 and 1 mana is huge here, so yeah, I think I might just run it back as is. I think we're pretty well set up with our current configuration, so okay, so a little bit land heavy here, but with Psy, I think this is definite keep. You know, the player who has Psy is gonna be able to gum up the board. You know, like I said, if one player has Psy and the other player doesn't have Shadow Spear, the player with Psy is almost definitely going to run away with the game, so hopefully we don't draw any more lands, but I think this is a pretty reasonable keep. Okay, so we did draw another land, but Ottawara is probably the best land to draw because we have other uses for it later in the game. So we'll lead on the prototype here, see what the opponent's got. Okay, so they have Portable Hole for the prototype again. Okay, Nettle Cyst is a nice one. I think we'll hold on to the Spellbomb until after we've played Psy, just so we can get an additional token off it. So they play Sentinel. Okay, and Emery's a little bit annoying. Hopefully they don't get anything that good. Okay, double Nettle Cyst and Sentinel. They're good cards, but they're not that good specifically against Psy, so I'm not too concerned about that. So we'll get Psy down here. And Reality Chip's a great draw as well. You know, the combo of Psy plus Reality Chip is generally like insane anyway, but in this particular matchup it's really good. Okay, so they missed the land drop there. And we have quite a few potential plays this turn. I definitely want to get Reality Chip in play, and I think I want to get Prototype and Spellbomb into play, which will draw them a card off Sentinel, which is a bit concerning considering they missed a land drop, but I think it's still worth it just to get a bunch of 1/1s into play so we can go off even further next turn. I think it's important to get Prototype into play so that we can have more of explosive next turn. Now we could have played Prototype first and then played the Reality Chip and held on to the Spellbomb to not give them an extra card, but you know, I think it's more important to apply pressure while we're in this situation, so I want to get more stuff into play while we can. And then next turn we can probably afford to play more around the Sentinels. Okay, so we've got Psy on top. I think it's just really important to reconfigure the reality chip here and just set up our insane late game like we did last game. So we'll activate the prototype here. Reconfigure the reality chip. Probably onto one of our 1/1s. Just so the opponent is less incentivized to bounce it. Then we'll activate the spell bomb. Oh, perfect. Ornithopter on top. Then we can play a land off the top as well. Wow, we got Emery as well. Let's see what else we hit. And another land. I mean, that was still a pretty sick turn, and we can afford to attack him with the 1/1s here as well. And yeah, I feel pretty good about this spot. The opponent only has Nettle Cyst in their grave, which doesn't really do anything here. You know, Nettle Cyst without Shadow Spear against a Psy just isn't going to do anything because we have so many chump blockers. Okay, they got another Sentinel, which is a bit of a bit annoying considering we have to pay 3 every turn now. But okay, and we see another Nettle Cyst. So as long as they don't have Shadow Spear here, I'm pretty happy. Well, they attack him with everything. I mean, that doesn't seem good because we can just kill both Sentinels here. I mean, we're happy to see that for sure. Okay, sweet. Nice, we got there. Okay, well this is a mull. No blue mana, so definitely going to mull that. So generally I'm not a big fan of 1-land hands, but on the draw when we have Moonsnare Prototype as well as a way to produce mana, I don't think this is too bad. Just trying to think what we put back here. So we want to keep ideally Prototype, Ornithopter and Spell Bomb so that we can play 3 spells on 1 turn. Putting back Nettle Cyst seems a bit weird, but with Thought Monitor and Reality Chip, oh, and we drew another Nettle Cyst anyway. But yeah, I want to keep these 3 so that we can get 3 artifacts down on turn 1 here, and so that we can almost guarantee to cast Reality Chip next turn, even if we don't draw a land for the turn. Okay, so opponent uses Play with Fire, which we're happy about because they did it direct to us instead of killing our Ornithopter, which is great. So even if they do kill Ornithopter here, if they're like playing Burn or something, which it looks like they are, then I was going to say we're guaranteed to play Reality Chip even if we miss our land, but because we hit our land drop we can play Nettle Cyst here, which is pretty huge. Now it is a 3/3, so it can die to, you know, Lightning Strike or Static Discharge, but okay, so they just play Bone Crusher out, which is fine. We can play out Reality Chip here, and we'll definitely use Prototype first, just in case we want to bounce something with the Spell Bomb. Just pass here, and I think I'd be happy to trade off this 4/4 for the Bone Crush Giant, especially now that we know they're running like a Torbrand, more creature-based build, because we're mainly worried about Embercleave, and if we kill the Bone Crusher here, if they have Embercleave and they don't have their 5th land, they won't be able to play it next turn. So we won't crack the Spell Bomb here because we have Thought Monitors. We'll play the Tormod's Crypt, and then we get to play both Thought Monitors here, which is great. Okay, double Emery. We see a land on top, so we'll definitely play the Thought Monitor first, then we'll draw a land and we get to play Emery here as well, so this is a pretty sick turn. And the great thing is now that even if they do have Embercleave, we now have Spell Bomb plus Emery to just bounce whatever creature they have Embercleave on. Okay, so they attack first here. I'm definitely going to block, you know, against a mono red deck. Plus, if they kill Thought Monitor, we can just keep getting it back with Emery. Okay, so they do have Embercleave, but again, that's fine. We have Spell Bomb to deal with the Torbrand anyway, so that's not a big deal at all. So I think we'll lead on getting back the Thought Monitor here. We could get back Nettle Cyst, but they've only got 1 creature in play, and we can get back Spell Bomb every turn with Emery anyway, so that's not a huge deal. Okay, Psy is great, but so we could play Psy, but we might be better off just equipping Nettle Cyst, because how many artifacts would that be? I think that would just provide a 2-turn clock. So if we equip the Nettle Cyst to the Thought Monitor here, and then we need to hold up a blue mana for the Spell Bomb. We can play Moonsnare Prototype and still hold up the blue mana. Yeah, so it's an 11/11, so we kill them next turn, and we can bounce whatever creature they have Embercleave on anyway, so we should hopefully win here. I can't really think of anything they'd have that would stop us here, so we'll just bounce the Spell Bomb. Bounce the Torbrand with the Spell Bomb in response to their attack, and there's nothing they can really do about that now. You know, if we didn't play the Nettle Cyst on the Thought Monitor, they could kill the Emery and then set up for Embercleave again the following turn. Yeah, so they used Bone Crusher on us. They could have killed the Emery and had Bone Crusher the following turn. So I definitely think equipping the Nettle Cyst was the correct play there. So we should just win here. Yeah, nice. So sideboarding here, definitely want the third Shadow Spear. This is a matchup where it's going to pull a lot of weight against mono red. Tormod's Crypt doesn't really do anything, so I think we'll probably be wanting to cut that second Tormod's Crypt as well. And I think the best replacement is probably just a single Metallic Rebuke here. You know, it's not particularly great against mono red, but just having a single counter spell to stop something like Embercleave or Torbrand is much more useful than a Tormod's Crypt when they basically... You know, if they're playing the creature-based build, they're not interacting with the graveyard at all. If they're playing the mono-red build, where they have maybe Dragon's Rage Channeler or Gitu Lava Runner, then Tormod's Crypt might have some utility there, but it basically does nothing there. So, another one-lander, but no Moonsnare Prototype, so I think this is probably a mull. And yeah, this looks good. Spellbomb and Emery, again, can win the game on its own. Sai should be fantastic. You know, it feels weird putting back Nettle Cyst here, but especially against the mono red deck, but I think it's probably the right put back. Sai can win the game on its own. Spellbomb can shut off their Embercleave avenue of attack, and even though Emery can be killed if they have burn spells, they're running the more creature-based build, so there's a decent chance that they just use Bone Crusher and they're not going to have a removal spell for Emery. And if Emery can live and we can use Spellbomb plus Emery every turn, that's just a guaranteed way that we can win. So thankfully Robert doesn't get a card off the top of our library because we don't have that many cards in hand. We'll play Emery here, and fingers crossed it can survive a turn. Even if it can't, we've still got Sai, and Sai plus Thought Monitor is really good, especially because we've got 2 Treasure Vaults. If we can hit some artifacts for Sai... Okay, so Emery doesn't survive, which is a bit annoying, but if we can hit some more artifacts for Sai, we can get Thought Monitor into play really quickly. Now, even though we do want Spellbomb in play for the Thought Monitor, I think we're better off cracking it here, because we want to have artifacts to play once we play Sai. Okay, sweet, that was perfect, because now we can play Sai and play Ornithopter to get a 1/1 immediately. And then next turn, you know, providing everything survives, we can go Reality Chip into Thought Monitor. And we have a bunch of 1/1s in play at that point, so mainly worried about Embercleave here, but okay, so they do have Chainwelder, which will take out one of the 1/1s, which is a little bit annoying, but not the end of the world. And now, so we can play Reality Chip here, and then if we play another Treasure Vault, we can also play Thought Monitor this turn, which is pretty sick. See what we draw. Okay. So we'll just pass it. Now the opponent could have Embercleave, which could be problematic. So I think we'll definitely block both of them here. We'll block like this so that if they do have Embercleave, they're incentivized to attach it to the robber. Okay, which they do have Embercleave. Okay, sweet. They do attach it to the robber, which means we take less damage, which is pretty important. Because I think my game plan here is just to attach Reality Chip, probably to Sai, so it dodges their Bone Crusher Giants if they have them, and then just try and survive a turn and pop off the top of our library with the Reality Chip. So we're trying to stem the bleeding as much as we can. So we'll activate the Moonsnare Prototype to produce a mana, and then we'll reconfigure onto Sai so it dodges their burn spells. And then, yeah, we're just trying to survive this turn and try and get a bunch of stuff in play off Sai next turn. Hopefully hit a Shadow Spear or a Nettle Cyst would be great. Okay, so they have a Chainwelder, which is pretty annoying. They take out 2 of the 1/1s. I mean, we wouldn't really be blocking the robber anyway because it has trample. Thankfully, we can still block the chain whirler with Ornithopter, and we just got to hope the top of our deck is nice to us here. Survive at 4. Okay, Amber's a good start. Get 1-1 into play, play a land off the top. Okay, sick. Nettlecyst is great here, because that provides a blocker that can actually block the Ember Cleaved creature. Okay, more artifacts on top is great. So Nettlecyst is an 8/8, which will become a 10/10 now. Ornithopter on top again is fantastic. Oh wow, and Shadow Spear. So I think we have enough mana here, if we wanted to attach both the Shadow Spear and the Nettlecyst to Sai to get in for like, what, 15 life or 16 life thinking damage? Yeah, sweet. Alright, nice. Reality Chip got us there.